which have been routine meetings that have been long scheduled.
Can I say, I know it's the first Wednesday back, we're all excitable, a little calm so I can hear the Minister. Come on, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Routine meetings that have been long scheduled, and certainly not a cause for exuberance or overexcitement from the benches opposite. Mr. Speaker, as we know, the world has faced surging energy prices since Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've seen high inflation, very high inflation across the Western world, and we've seen a cycle of increasing interest rates across Western economies as well, across many Western economies. But let me reassure the House that the fundamentals of the United Kingdom's economy remain resilient. Unemployment at 3.5% is the lowest it's been in my lifetime. And for the record, I was born in 1976. Economic growth last year, the calendar year 2021, was the highest of any G7 country, 7.5%. And just yesterday, the IMF forecast that economic growth, GDP growth, this current year in the UK would be at 3.6%. Once again, for the second consecutive year, the highest of any G7 country. So our economy is in resilient condition. But I know that many families are worried about the challenges we face. And that is why just a few weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we introduced the energy price guarantee. Families were genuinely fearful that they might face energy bills this winter of £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000 or even £7,000 per year. But that energy price guarantee will ensure the average household sees energy prices no higher than £2,500 on average, not for 6 months like the Labour plan, but for 2 years. And we also introduced a growth plan to get our economy growing, to see wages sustainably rising, to see good jobs created, and to create a sustainable tax base to fund our public services. This government has a growth plan. The opposition has no plan. But Mr. Speaker, we intend to do this in a way that is fiscally responsible, and that is why on the 31st of October, in less than 3 weeks' time, the Chancellor of the Exchequer will set out the medium-term fiscal plan, explaining to the House exactly how he will do that and how we will continue the UK's track record of having the highest growth in the G7, not just last year, but this year as well.
Rachel Reeves.
Mr. Speaker, people are facing insecurity, instability, and deep anxiety, and they deserve answers. Conservative economic policy has caused mayhem with financial markets, have pushed up mortgage costs, and put pension funds in peril. And it's wiped £300 billion of the UK stock and bond markets, all directly caused by the choices of this government. The mini-budget just 19 days ago was a bonfire made up of unfunded tax cuts, excessive borrowing, and repeated undermining of economic institutions. It was built and then set ablaze by a Conservative Party totally out of control. Not disruptors, but pyromaniacs. And that fire has now spread. And yet government deny all responsibility. So will the Minister tell the House what guarantees will the government give that the currency slide will stop and that people's pensions are safe? How do they expect people to pay £500 more a month on average on their mortgages? How many more repossessions of family homes will there be if the government do not change course? How much more is the government borrowing on debt interest because of higher borrowing costs? While ministers desperately try to blame global conditions, why is it that no other central bank in the world has had to step in 3 times in less than 3 weeks to protect financial stability? The country now faces a very serious situation. Ahead of the ending of the Bank of England's emergency operations this Friday, what action will the government take to ensure that their budget doesn't have further consequences for financial stability or for people's pensions? Mr. Speaker, this is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, but it is ordinary working people who are paying the price. And it can only be resolved when the Conservatives put aside their pride and reverse this catastrophic mini-budget, and they must do so now.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor calls for a reversal of the growth plan, yet at the first opportunity last night, they voted for it. She asked about mortgage rates. Let me point out to the Shadow Chancellor that mortgage rates around the world have been on an upward trajectory all year. And in fact, if we compare base rates in the United Kingdom to the United States, she will be aware that in both countries, the base rate started this year at 0.25%. In the UK, the base rate is currently 2.25. In the US, it is 3.25, a full percentage point higher. She referenced borrowing costs. She should be aware, I'm sure she is aware, that 2-year government bond yields are about the same in the US as they are in the UK. The US bond yields have been going up in the course of this year as well. She referenced the currency. The dollar has shown strength against a basket of currencies throughout this calendar year. And if she looks at the dollar strengthening against the euro, it strengthened about 15% this calendar year. It strengthened about 15%. It strengthened about 15% against sterling. Very, very similar figures. She asked about the cost of living as well. We are very mindful of that. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we have introduced a £37 billion package to help people, disproportionately targeted at people on lower incomes, so the people on the 1/3 of lower incomes receive £1,200. That is why we've introduced, on I think the 2nd or 3rd day in office, the energy price guarantee, making sure people don't pay on average more than £2,500 instead of facing bills of £5,000 or £6,000, not for 6 months like the Labour Party offered, but for 2 years. That's why the national minimum wage last April was increased by a large amount. That's why the national insurance threshold was increased up to £12,500 in July. So people on lower incomes now pay virtually no national insurance or income tax. That's the package of measures that this government has introduced, because we stand on the side of working people and we've taken the steps needed to support them.
We come to the chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, was quite right to have brought forward the date for the medium-term plan and the OBR forecast. He has, of course, a huge challenge now in landing those plans to reassure the markets. He has to get the fiscal rules right. He has to come forward with spending restraint and revenue raisers that are politically deliverable. Given the huge challenges, there are many, myself included, who believe that it is quite possible that he will simply have to come forward with a further rowing back on the tax announcements that he made on the 23rd of September. So could I ask my right honourable friend to confirm that that possibility is still on the table?
And well, I thank the Select Committee Chairman for his counsel, which I know the Chancellor always listens to very carefully. Of course, the Select Committee Chairman, I think, suggested publicly that the date for the medium-term fiscal plan should be brought forward along with others, and the Chancellor listened to the Select Committee Chair and responded by bringing forward the date from November the 23rd to October the 31st. There are not any plans to reverse any of the tax measures announced in the growth plan. There is, I think, a measure of consensus. Indeed, the Labour Party voted just last night for the reduction in national insurance, because we want to make sure the UK is a competitive jurisdiction where companies and high potential individuals who are internationally mobile choose to come to the United Kingdom to locate and to grow. But we do, of course, as the Select Committee Chairman says, need to make sure we do this in a way that is fiscally responsible, to make sure that debt over GDP does fall in the medium term, and the strategy, the plan, will lay out exactly how that will be achieved to the House in detail, scored by the OBR on October the 31st.
West MP spokesperson, Alison Thulas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. He talks up the IMF, but not their criticism yesterday or the pathetic growth they've projected for next year of just 0.3%. It's funny that. The Treasury Select Committee took evidence this morning from a range of economists, all of whom echoed the concerns of the public about the chaos this shambolic UK Tory government has created. I'm not sure if he considers Deutsche Bank as part of his anti-growth coalition, but their chief economist, Sanjay Raja, this morning was very clear that the UK had particular characteristics that was making this crisis worse. He said, you've got a sidelined fiscal watchdog, you've got the lack of a medium-term fiscal plan, one of the largest unfunded tax cuts and package of measures since the early 1970s, and it's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. This is chaos that he and his colleagues have deliberately created, and it's impacting people and businesses across these islands. So I ask him, will he bring more money to devolved institutions to help them tackle the chaos that he and his colleagues have created? Will he commit to uprating benefits by inflation and give some more support to those in the asylum system and those on no recourse to public funds? Will he bring certainty to businesses who don't know yet what will happen at the end of the 6-month reprieve, because those bills have not gone away? Mr. Speaker, Glasgow Centre for Population Health published some research that attributed around 330,000 excess deaths in 2010 to austerity. Tory austerity by him and his colleagues over the past 12 years. So will he cancel any further cuts, because they cost Scotland and our neighbours far more than we can ever afford? Scotland didn't want this, didn't vote for this, and can no longer trust in the financial stability of the UK, never mind this Tory government.
Can I just say, I have the greatest respect for the Honourable Lady, but I would say she knows the rules is 1 minute, not 1 minute, 45 seconds or 2. So please, let's stick to the rules of the House. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Scottish Government, of course, is receiving record levels of funding, and that will continue. She asked about excess deaths. Well, I think the drug death record of the nationalist government is frankly pretty terrible. She asked about the uprating to welfare. There is a statutory process that happens every year, every autumn, and that decision has not been taken. It'll happen in the normal way, as it has done for every year. She referenced the IMF's growth forecast for next year. I've already pointed out that last year we had the highest growth in the G7. This year we have the highest growth in the G7. And if you take the 3 years together, last year, this year, and next year, you will find that the UK at 11.7% over those 3 years still has, across the 3 years, the highest growth of any G7 country. The Chancellor, she asked about institutions. The Chancellor and the Prime Minister have the highest regard for the OBR and the Bank of England. They're meeting regularly with both of those institutions. She referenced the growth plan, having a competitive tax system, supply-side reforms to unleash the productive potential of our economy, and making our energy market function properly once again are essential prerequisites for growth, and I'm proud it's this government that are promoting them.
Andrew Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed at the Shadow Chancellor, who is a very good economist, who is accusing the government of causing problems for people's mortgage rates. But my honourable friend, I'm sure, will agree with me that one of the worst things that can hit any economy is a wage price spiral as a result of huge inflation. And so can my honourable friend confirm to this House that the action the government has taken to provide support to the economy, to provide this huge input to energy prices, will bring down headline inflation and specifically make mortgage rates better than they would have been otherwise? Totally the opposite to what the Shadow Chancellor is saying.
Well, my right honourable friend, of course, has a very distinguished professional track record in financial services, is absolutely right. A range of independent forecasters have confirmed that the energy price guarantee will not only protect our constituents from high prices, it will also lower inflation by about 5% compared to where it would otherwise have been a vital intervention. And while we're on the subject of inflation, it is worth keeping in mind that inflation in continental Europe, in many countries, is considerably higher than it is in the United Kingdom. For example, in Germany, it is 10.9%, and in Holland, it's 14%.
Dave McHillier.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister has made great play of supporting people with their energy bills, but businesses only get support until March. And the government also puts great play on creating growth. Many of the businesses in my constituency, particularly hospitality businesses, with only a guarantee on their energy bills till March, are making decisions in the coming weeks about whether they will be able to stay open and continue to be employers. How does that help growth? And will he give them some guarantee from March onwards?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises questions about timeframes. Of course, the Labour proposal was only for 6 months for consumers and businesses, and I didn't hear her criticising that. The consumer offer is for 24 months, for 2 years. In relation to businesses, she is quite right. The Honourable Lady is quite right. The business scheme is for 6 months, but the government made a commitment back in September that within 3 months of September, so within 2 months of now, further plans will be brought forward to explain to businesses and charities and indeed the public sector how they will be handled after March of next year. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will announce that to the House in the coming weeks.
Andrew Salu.
Growing our tax revenues in a way that is sustainable in every sense of that word is clearly massively important to pay for all the things we deeply care about. But will my right honourable friend reassure us that he does get the significance of government borrowing costs and that he will make sure that His Majesty's government does nothing that pushes those up unnecessarily high compared with the United States and Germany?
Yes, my honourable friend is making a very important and very reasonable point. And I've said already, he mentions comparisons with other countries. Of course, our 2-year bond yield is about the same as the United States at the moment. But we are mindful of the need to ensure reasonable borrowing costs, which of course means financial responsibility. Our debt to GDP ratio today is the second lowest in the G7. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be setting out in under 3 weeks' time, on October the 31st, precisely how he will be delivering fiscal stability and fiscal responsibility in the years ahead. And I'm sure my honourable friend, when he hears that statement, will be reassured and comforted by it.
Emma Hardy.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today we were given evidence on the Treasury Select Committee, which was incredibly sobering. All 5 of the economic specialists agreed that the UK's budget had contributed.
Remember, just come back and listen to another question. You shouldn't just dash out. Please, Emma Hardy, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, earlier today we had evidence on the Treasury Select Committee where all 5 economists agreed that the UK's budget has contributed to the current economic turmoil. So with the Prime Minister earlier stating there was going to be no budget cuts, and further to the point for my friend, the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, does the Minister agree with Mohammed El-Iran, the Chief Economic Advisor at Alliance, who said yesterday, "I see no alternative but the government saying we will not cut taxes now"?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I've already set out how there have been global trends over the last 6 or 9 months in terms of higher energy prices, higher inflation, and a cycle of increasing interest rates around the globe. And in particular, I set out how the monetary tightening in the United States at 300 basis points over the last 9 months or 10 months is 1.5 times higher than the fiscal tightening in the United Kingdom, which has been over the same period 200 basis points. In relation to her questions about balancing the books over the medium term, I mean, the fiscal plan, the medium-term fiscal plan will set that out. We do intend to control public spending, for example, to stick within, well, let's listen to the answer, to stick within the SR21 spending limits. But I would point out to the House that those SR21 spending limits do see real terms increases over the 3 years. But we are going to be sticking with iron discipline to those spending limits and not increasing them. And we'll also show spending restraint in the years ahead. But showing spending restraint is different to real terms cuts.
James Cartledge.
It's very welcome that a few minutes ago the Chief Secretary said that the effect of the statement on 31st of October would be to show that the Chancellor was 100% committed to fiscal responsibility. That is very welcome to colleagues on all sides, I think. That means that all the previous unfunded tax cuts will now be funded in that statement.
What the statement will set out in the round is how we will get debt as a proportion of GDP falling in the medium term. That is the critical metric, and that is what the medium-term fiscal plan will deliver.
Dame Angela Riddle.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just offer the Chief Secretary to the Treasury some gentle advice? If he refuses to accept that the fiscal event on the 23rd has had any effect on what's happened in the markets since, then that will not be reassuring for the markets. He needs to stop being in denial and admit that serious mistakes were made. Now, the Prime Minister said in Prime Minister's questions there would be no public spending cuts, and yet we know, as a result of the fiscal event and the unfunded tax cuts, that there's a £60 billion gap between the expenditure and the money coming in. So no public spending cuts. That only leaves the reversal of the tax cuts to balance the books, doesn't it?
Well, look, I've already explained in response to a previous question that spending restraint is not the same as real terms cuts. We do not plan real term cuts, but we do plan iron discipline when it comes to spending restraint. But the answers to her questions will be set out in full at the fiscal statement, which will be accompanied by a full OBR scoring and a set of OBR forecasts, when all of these questions will get very clearly answered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intervention of the Bank of England into both the gilt market and the corporate bond market has alarmed many over the recent days. I'd be interested in the Chief Secretary's view as to what is the Treasury's assessment of the cost to the Treasury and the fiscal position to the Bank of England's interventions in those markets.
I thank my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden, for his question. It obviously depends on the prices at which the Bank of England buy and sell bonds or gilts in the market. It's worth observing that so far they've purchased considerably less by value of gilts than the limits that were set out originally. So the volume of gilts that they've got on their balance sheet now, much less than the limits. But to answer his question about fiscal cost, that if there is any fiscal cost, that will depend entirely on market prices.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 days before the budget, a young constituent of mine had hoped to buy her home through shared ownership. She was offered a mortgage at 4.28 interest by the Halifax. A day after the statement, the offer was withdrawn, and it has rocketed for a 2-year fixed rate deal to 6.9%. That's £150 a month more overnight because of the government's unfunded giveaways to people on over 150 grand per year. What would be his advice to my constituent? Should she take the deal, or would he agree with this morning's panel of experts at the Treasury Select Committee that she should not go near it because house prices are about to plummet?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously not going to offer individual financial advice to constituents. What I would say is there are around about 2,300 mortgage products currently on the market. I would say we are very keen as a government to help first-time buyers, particularly younger first-time buyers in their 20s and 30s, which is why stamp duty is being cut for cheaper purchases, and in particular, the threshold for stamp duty for first-time buyers is being raised, I think from memory, to £425,000, which particularly helps when it comes to putting together a deposit, because of course deposits can't be mortgage funded. In addition to that, we want to help people with the broader cost of living pressures, which obviously makes it easier to find money to fund mortgages. That's what the energy price guarantee is designed to do. It's what lower tax rates in general are designed to do, including the tax rates that the tax reductions rather, that the Labour Party voted for yesterday. It's what the cost of living package is designed to do, the £37 billion. So by helping with the cost of living in general, we are obviously making mortgage costs a little bit easier to meet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IMF yesterday underlined the UK government, the UK's economy's position as being the fastest growing in the G7. And in spite of the noises off, they further stated that the recent fiscal changes will add further to growth projections. That's in addition to the record low unemployment data that has been highlighted this week. But does my right honourable friend agree that further changes need to be made in terms of supply-side reforms, which will continue the momentum in the growing economy, so that that will result in real jobs in my constituency and right across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for mentioning again the international comparisons. The unemployment figure in the UK, 3.5%, which members opposite have inexplicably not been asking about, the lowest in my lifetime, compares very favourably to France, where it's more than double, 7.3%, or Italy, where it's 7.8%. Even in Canada, it is 5.2%. So our unemployment figures compare very favourably internationally. And when it comes to the growth figures my friend asked about, the UK once again over the last 3 years taken together, 11.7% over those 3 years, heads the G7 considerably, 4 times higher nearly than Germany at 3.9%. Over double Japan at 5.1%, and higher than France, Italy, Canada, and the USA. But he asked about supply-side reforms to help his constituents, and my honourable friend will be hearing a lot more about those supply-side reforms in the coming weeks, both from Secretaries of State directly and from the Chancellor at the medium-term fiscal plan, to explain how we're going to get regulatory burdens off the back of businesses to help them grow and create the jobs for his constituents that he quite rightly wants to see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The mini-budget fiasco has caused a material risk to UK's financial stability, and the Bank of England has said that $1 trillion could have been erased from the UK pension fund investments if it hadn't stepped in following the mini-budget turmoil. So the Minister needs to heed the advice of the Chairman of the Treasury Committee and others across the House and junk the tax cuts in this budget. They're unfunded and they're creating chaos in the markets. We need to restore confidence so that our constituents don't suffer. The Minister needs to stop being arrogant and take heed, listen to the expertise and take action.
If the honourable lady objects so much to tax reductions, why did she vote for them yesterday?
Absolutely. Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I spoke with business leaders in my Crawley constituency, and they welcomed both the near record low unemployment levels and the International Monetary Fund outlook of 3.6% growth. Does the Chief Secretary to the Treasury agree with me that that is a direct consequence of the policies that this government is enacting?
Yes, I do. The leading growth in the G7 and the lowest unemployment figures in my lifetime are testament to the sagacity of this government's economic policies.
Sarah Olney.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Today is another day when the government's mismanagement of the economy is causing market turmoil, putting thousands of pensioners and mortgage holders at risk. The Governor of the Bank of England yesterday told pension funds to sort it out after announcing that the bank's emergency bond buying scheme will close in 2 days. The government has 48 hours to save pension funds. Will the government call the Chancellor back from Washington, hold an emergency cabinet meeting and deal with the pension crisis?
The Chancellor is in extremely regular contact with the Governor of the Bank of England. Obviously, the bank and its various agencies have responsibility for systemic financial stability. We're working closely with them and we have complete confidence in the bank's management of this process.
Robert Walton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party stands for low taxes, but also for fiscal responsibility and sound money. Given that the Prime Minister has just said that there will not be public sector spending cuts, can I ask the Chief Secretary to the Treasury if the government are considering deferring any of the tax measures recently announced by the Chancellor?
We don't plan to defer the tax measures because we think having an internationally competitive tax system is important because it will help encourage businesses and successful individuals to locate here in the United Kingdom rather than anywhere else. I used to be technology minister, and tech businesses can choose whether they locate here or New York or San Francisco or Singapore or South Korea or anywhere else in the world. We want them to choose the United Kingdom, and that is why competitive tax rates and the right regulatory environment is so important.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Britain has embraced globalisation arguably more than other nations around the world over the last couple of decades. About half of our GDP is subject to international headwinds. But the world is getting more dangerous, not less. He mentioned Ukraine. Could I suggest that any future fiscal statement is run by the National Security Council for comment and perhaps recommendations which might include organising a United Nations safe haven around the port of Odessa so those grain ships can get out, helping reduce the price of food, reducing inflation in this country?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his suggestion around Odessa. I know he's a sort of expert in military matters and matters of international diplomacy, and of course he's, I think, been to Ukraine in the past 12 months. I'll certainly pass his suggestion on to my colleagues.
Sure.
I don't think ministers appreciate the gravity or the urgency of this situation, Mr. Speaker. We have a Prime Minister committing to no spending cuts a few minutes ago. We have a government still committed to tens of billions of pounds of unfunded tax cuts, and the Bank of England withdrawing its special support on Friday. What is the government doing to avoid a market crash this Friday?
Well, I mean, the reason that on the second day of the new government's term in office, we brought forward the energy price guarantee was to protect consumers and effectively lower inflation by 5% compared to where it would otherwise be. We've legislated at pace yesterday to alleviate the burden of the national insurance increase, which members opposite enthusiastically voted for. In terms of markets, we're, as I've said already, in regular contact with the Bank of England and have complete confidence in their ability to manage systemic financial stability.
Marco Longi.
Mr. Speaker, the funds made available by the Bank of England to purchase gilts have been described by the Shadow Chancellor as taxpayers' money. Now, I find that very confusing because my understanding, not as an economist, is that those funds are not taxpayers' money. In fact, the Bank of England may even make a profit from the actions it takes on the markets. Different people will have different views as to whether this is an appropriate action by the Bank of England in terms of their intervention. However, will he agree with me that it is completely wrong for the Shadow Chancellor to describe it as taxpayers' money?
It is not taxpayers' money in the sense that the phrase suggests. And there is a fiscal indemnity so that any profit or loss will end up flowing back to the Exchequer. But as I said to my honourable friend, the member for Hitchin and Harpenden, whether that is crystallised depends on market prices. But I would point out that the value or the volume of gilts so far purchased is considerably less than the limits that were set out.
Sammy Wilson.
COVID supply side disruption and the war in Ukraine has obviously added to inflation, as has the monetary policy in the United States and our own high levels of borrowing added to the rate of interest here in the United Kingdom. And that has put real pressure on households across the United Kingdom. Despite the fact that the government has responded by putting more money in people's pockets and through tax cuts and also with the help with the electricity bills, there is real concern, public concern, about the economic stability of our economy. And would the Chancellor accept that this is partly due to poor political decisions such as reducing the top rate of taxation, bad communication of his own strategy, open warfare on his own benches, and some of the careless remarks we saw yesterday from the Governor of the Bank of England?
Look, I think the Prime Minister said a couple of weeks ago that some of the pitch rolling or preparation could, with hindsight, have been better handled. But I think that the package of measures that have been taken are in the interests of the country in addressing the cost of living pressures that the honourable gentleman refers to. You know, we are protecting our fellow citizens, our constituents, from what could have been £5,000, £6,000 or £7,000 annual energy bills. That is really important. We're alleviating the burden of taxation at what is a very difficult time. We're making sure that the households most in need of assistance get that additional assistance, amounting to £1,200 per year for the 1/3 of households on lower incomes. All of those are measures that are designed to protect our constituents, and I'm sure he would join with me in welcoming those.
No. Robert Hull.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Of course, I welcome the energy intervention and help for the lower paid. But can I just ask my right honourable friend, does he agree that just as it's important to grow the economy, it's important to grow society? And if we believe in trickle-down theory, we also should have trickle-up economics. And what I mean by that is we need to invest in education and skills. And will my right honourable friend confirm that educational spending will be increased in real terms, and it will incorporate the rises in wages, whatever they may finally be, in terms of the wages for staff who work in education, teachers and support staff, and many other people in education?
Yeah, well, look, I thank my honourable friend for his question. He is, of course, as chairman of the Education Select Committee, a tireless campaigner for education and skills. I agree with his point that the purpose of economic growth is to grow all parts of the economy, to help people across the entire income spectrum, rich and poor alike, and to make sure the burden of taxation on those people is as light as it can be. And that's why we've increased the minimum wage by such a large amount, from £5.93 an hour when Labour left office up to £9.50 an hour today. It's why we've lifted so many people on lower incomes completely out of taxation by increasing not just the income tax, but also the national insurance threshold to £12,570, all of which disproportionately help people on lower incomes. When it comes to education spending, we're very seized of the importance of making sure education is properly funded. It is an investment in our country's future, in our children's future, and I can assure him that is very much at the front of our minds as we think about the fiscal plan.
Richard Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like many others, I've listened with disbelief to much of what the Chief Secretary has said. During this debate, whilst we've been in this debate, the Bank of England has again linked the economic turmoil to the government's disastrous mini-budget. So can the Chief Secretary explain to us all and to the public why he is right and the Bank of England is wrong?
I can explain again, as I've done before. We're in a global cycle of interest rate increases. There's been global dollar strength, and we've taken action in the energy intervention and in the growth plan to protect our constituents and to get our economy growing and build on our record as the fastest growing G7 economy last year, this year, and over the 3-year period as a whole.
It's understandable.
Thank you very much indeed, Speaker. The whole world is facing a global inflation crisis, with the US, Germany, and other countries facing a worse situation. And that is why I believe the best way for people to deal with the situation is to get more people into better quality jobs, which is why I've already hosted 2 job fairs in Rother Valley, another one in Friday week in Wales High School. And please see, 680 more people this year are in work than they were last year, and 14 more people in work this month than last month. Does agree with me that the most important thing is to get people in good quality paying jobs, and this government will always stand by working people.
Absolutely. I completely agree with my honourable friend. His work on the jobs fairs, I think, is extremely commendable. The way out of poverty, the way to create prosperity, is getting people into good jobs. That is the way, and see rising wages. That is the way we will combat poverty, and that is why it is so welcome that unemployment is at a 48-year low.
Catherine McKinnell.
With the greatest respect, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury doesn't seem to be inhabiting the same planet as the rest of us. It is clear to anyone that the government's half-baked mini-budget, sidelining of the Office for Budget Responsibility, and lack of authority has caused chaos in the markets, and households are already paying the price. So shouldn't the government just accept that it can do something now in the national interest to change this? It can reverse this disastrous mini-budget that has set us into chaos, and it can call a general election now so that the country can decide how they want to get out of this crisis.
Well, she calls for a reversal of the growth plan, yet she voted in favour of its largest measure just last night. She talks about sidelining the OBR, yet the OBR will be fully scoring the medium-term fiscal plan on the 31st of October. The right response is to protect our constituents from rising energy prices. We did that on our 2nd or 3rd day in office. The right response is to get our economy growing, and that's what the growth plan will do.
Imran Hussain.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister today has made much mention of spending and pay restraints. The government has repeatedly told workers during the cost of living crisis they must accept pay restraint to keep inflation in check, whilst plotting to make further swinging cuts to public services. So can I ask the Chief Secretary why this pay restraint and these cuts don't apply to bankers too? And isn't it just the case that this is the same old Tory ideology of austerity for the pressed many and luxury for the privileged few?
Well, if I may respectfully say, I think that is nonsense. The tax reductions, including the ones that he voted for last night, apply to everybody in work earning more than £12,570 a year. The national insurance cut and the cut to the basic rate of income tax, those are tax cuts for everybody, rich and poor alike. The increases in the threshold disproportionately benefit people on lower incomes, and the people on the very lowest incomes now don't pay any national insurance or tax at all. And the significant increases we've seen in the national minimum wage from £5.93 an hour under Labour to £9.50 an hour now, again, most benefit people on low incomes, because this government stands on the side of people who are on lower wages but doing the right thing by working.
David.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his attempts to reassure the UK economy, even though it's simply not working. Does the Minister agree with the former Chief Advisor to the Bank of England who said that because of this budget, we can simply say goodbye to growth?
Respectfully, no, I don't agree.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Mr. Speaker, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have commented on reports that the government plans to increase benefits only in line with earnings instead of CPI September inflation, stating that this would amount to the biggest, deliberate, permanent, real terms cut to the basic rate of benefits ever made in a single year. Can the Chief Secretary assure my frightened constituents today that firstly, these reports aren't true, and secondly, that he will be uprating benefits in line with CPI inflation in September?
I've already explained, and I think I said yesterday, that there is a statutory process that happens every single year where these decisions get taken. No decision has been taken on this question yet. Indeed, the September CPI figure, which is relevant, hasn't even been published yet. When the decisions are taken, of course, ministers will have regard to the cost of living pressures, the high inflation that we and many other countries are experiencing, although, of course, the energy intervention will make that inflation lower than it would otherwise be. We also, of course, do have to pay regard to hard-working taxpayers who ultimately have to pay the benefit bills, and we're going to take all of that into account when we make these decisions.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, following the government's pretty disastrous mini-budget, the hedge fund manager and Tory donor Crispin Odey is said to have made millions on shorting on the pound. It's also been suggested that the Chancellor met Crispin Odey for lunch in the weeks running up to the mini-budget. Is that true? And if so, what did they discuss?
And I'm afraid I have no idea who the Chancellor met. I'm sure if the honourable gentleman writes to the Chancellor, he'll set that out, but I don't know.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Chief Secretary about unemployment. I'd like to ask him how he can possibly crow about unemployment when there's fewer people in work than before the pandemic, and when rates of inactivity due to long-term sickness in this country are through the roof.
Good. Well, I think having the lowest unemployment in my lifetime and having lower unemployment than comparable countries like France and Italy is something that as a country we can be proud of. Now, of course, we're committed to working with people who have long-term sickness, working through the NHS, working with work coaches at DWP to find ways of enabling them to return to the workforce. Of course, we're going to work with them, but ultimately having the lowest unemployment rate in my lifetime, I think is something we should be proud of.
Devan Jones.
Speaker, listening to the Minister, I do wonder what colour the sky is in his world. But can I ask him, he talks about the energy price guarantee protecting families from up to £6,000 a year energy bills. But as a direct result of the government's mini-budget, my families in my North Durham constituency now face a mortgage increase of £6,000 a year, not just this year, but in future years as well. Now, you can blame international markets in terms of energy, but what is he actually going to admit that that mini budget actually has now led to those families paying £6,000 a year extra, if not more in some cases? And what is his advice to them?
I've explained already that there is a global upswing in interest rates. So he can say no and not want to hear it, but I'll just tell him again. In the United States, in the last 9 months, there has been a 3% increase in the Federal Reserve base rate. In that same period, the Bank of England base rate increase has only been 2%. It's gone up by 1.5 times more in the United States compared to the United Kingdom. But we do understand there are cost of living pressures. That's why we've stepped in with the energy price guarantee to protect families in his constituency and in mine for those £5,000 or £6,000 bills they would otherwise have faced. It's why we're alleviating the tax burden on their shoulders, and it's why we're going to ensure the economy grows.
Yeah. A few weeks ago, the Welsh Government warned that it faces a shortfall of some £4 billion to its 3-year funding settlement as a result of rising inflation. Can the Minister confirm that the Treasury will consider, in its statement at the end of the month, providing additional funding support to help mitigate the impact of inflation on the budgets of public services in Wales?
Well, I mean, public expenditure, both in Wales and across the whole United Kingdom, stands at record levels. It has never been higher. In relation to extra funding, no, we are going to have iron discipline when it comes to public spending. So the spending plan set out at the Comprehensive Spending Review 2021, covering this current financial year and the next 2, are limits we are going to stick to with discipline, because it is important we make the numbers add up.
John Cryer.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Secretary, in answer to his honourable friend a few minutes ago, said that the cost to the Treasury of the Bank of England's intervention was not known because it depends on pricing, which is fairly blindingly obvious even to him, I would imagine. Does that mean that the Treasury has made no assessment of that cost? If they have, what is it?
There you go.
Well, I mean, it depends on market prices, as I say, and lacking any sort of clairvoyance about where prices may in the future move. It is not possible to make an assessment if you don't know where prices are going to be in the future in a fast-moving market. But what I will repeat is that the volume of gilt purchases by the Bank of England have so far been a great deal below the ceiling that was set out.
Colin Lynch.
Mr. Speaker, the Resolution Foundation Chief Exec Torsten Bell told the Treasury Select Committee this morning, this is what happens when you're not paying attention. He said the government's proposals wouldn't have been a good idea in any times, but you definitely shouldn't be doing it in the current climate. Our constituents need this government to be paying attention. Where is the plan to stabilise the economy now and stem the ongoing damage the mini-budget continues to cause?
Well, the growth plan protected her constituents and mine from what could have been £6,000 or £7,000 energy bills this winter. Frankly, that is something I think they will welcome. And the growth plan will lay the foundations to continue the G7 leading growth we experienced last year and this year.
John Warrer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to dare the Minister to come to Newcastle and explain to my constituents worried about their mortgage payments, their pensions, their benefits payments, their public services, their businesses, the cost of their supermarket shop. Explain to them that this government is fiscally responsible. They would laugh in his face, which is what the markets are doing. Why can't he accept that the only way to address this crisis made in Downing Street is to withdraw the fiscal budget and put in place something credible, costed and competent?
Well, she once again calls for the withdrawal of the growth plan, and yet she voted last night for the biggest measure contained within it. I would be quite happy to explain to anyone, whether in Newcastle in her constituency or Croydon in South London in mine, that we're protecting people from energy price rises. We've got plans to keep our record growth levels going, that we're cutting taxes on working people, and we've got a plan to get the economy growing. I'll be happy to come anywhere in the country and explain that.
Paulette Hamilton.
Speaker, why does the Chief Secretary think the Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman, he said the mini budget was stupid and cruel? As I know, that's how my constituents in Erdington, King's Standing and Castle Vale think.
I would imagine constituents in her constituency as much as mine are pleased they will not be facing energy bills of £6,000 or £7,000 this winter, which the growth plan delivered. I don't agree with the analysis she read out from Mr. Krugman or Dr. Krugman. I think this plan, Professor Krugman, I'm happy to stand corrected, because this growth plan is one that will make sure that we continue with our G7 leading levels of growth.
The 60 billion of borrowing for the energy guarantee is to be paid back by bill payers, not the oil and gas producers who are making the record profits on the backs of the public's misery. That is not fair. So will he consider raising not the temporary windfall tax, but the basic tax rate for oil and gas producers, which in the UK is the lowest in the entire world? If he raised it even to the global average, he would raise an additional £13.4 billion every single year.
A couple of points to make. Firstly, energy companies already pay, or extraction companies already pay, around about double the rate of corporation tax that other companies do. In addition to that, we have imposed the energy profits levy, which sees the rate of taxation on their profits increase to 65%, which is a pretty significant rate of tax, even by Labour Party standards, which will raise around about £23 billion over the relevant 3-year period. He will also have seen the announcement by my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, just yesterday, to make sure that renewable companies are providing energy to our constituents at reasonable prices. So the suggestion that there is no contribution being made by the energy sector in these circumstances is frankly not accurate.
Exactly.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's quoted IMF analysis, but curiously not the part that warns that rising prices will be worse in the UK, noting that the government's tax cuts will complicate the fight against soaring prices, and expects higher prices to last longer in the UK than elsewhere. So can the Minister tell me what he believes his analysis will be on 1, food prices, and 2, tackling food poverty in the next 2 years?
Well, what I can say is that the energy intervention will make sure inflation in this country is about 5% lower than it would otherwise be. That's not a government forecast, that's the consensus of independent forecasters. And I can also say to the honourable gentleman that the inflation rate in the United Kingdom is lower than in some other countries, including Germany and Holland.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. No matter what the Minister said today, the fact remains that sums just do not add up. And that's a fact. They've lost control of the situation. They've shown a level of incompetency that's been rarely seen in British politics. And as a result of that, we've seen increased anxiety and even terror about cost of living and energy bills, but also now mortgages. And the point I want to ask him is about pensions. Can you give absolute guarantee assurance that people should not need to worry about the future of their pensions?
Yeah, good question.
Well, if he's asking about the state pension, the Prime Minister's been clear, we stand by the triple lock. If he's asking about the private pension system, then yes, I have complete confidence in the Bank of England's responsibilities around financial stability. And in relation to his first comment, I think having the lowest unemployment for 48 years and the highest economic growth in the G7 is something we should all be happy about.
Johnny Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as mortgage costs, the cost of lending to businesses is also going up, and UK Finance has said that small businesses have £204 billion in outstanding debt. What assessment has the Chancellor and his department made of the impact of the rise in borrowing costs, what they will have on businesses' ability to invest, and what is the Minister going to do about it?
We're very mindful of the impact that rising global interest rates have on businesses, and that is one of the reasons why we're going to keep corporation tax down at 19% rather than increase it to 25%. One thing I don't know, though, Mr. Speaker, is whether the Labour Party support that or not.
Exactly. Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to relay to the Chief Secretary a message that I've just received from one of my constituents who was watching PMQs. He says, the Prime Minister says she is unashamedly pro-growth and pro-business, but our local dry cleaner was in tears this morning at the news that their energy bill has gone up more than 4-fold. They say they get it, but they really don't. What does the Minister have to say to my constituent and to thousands more of my constituents who are simply terrified about how they will sustain their businesses
or keep a roof over their heads in the context of this self-inflicted chaos and harm to our economy that his government is causing?
Well, look, in relation to the energy bills for the dry cleaner in her constituency, I mean, just firstly, she must be aware that the energy price crisis is something that the whole world has been experiencing as a result of Putin's illegal invasion. That is what is driving energy prices higher. In relation to their bill, the dry cleaners should be the recipient of the business energy guarantee scheme. It shouldn't see bills rising as high as she just suggested. So if she could perhaps write to the base secretary or indeed to me with this particular case, I'd be very happy to look into it to try and make sure that that business, like businesses in all of our constituencies, are being properly protected.
Steve McCabe.
Thank you. Further to my honourable friend for Halton's question, will the Minister give us a few details of the government's backup plan to protect people's pensions should the run on gilts continue when current Bank of England support ends, despite dire warnings from the pensions industry?
Well, as I said already, the Chancellor of the Exchequer is in regular contact with the Governor of the Bank of England and his officials. The Bank of England have responsibility for financial system stability, and I've got complete confidence in their ability to manage that.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The energy price guarantee still means increases in costs for consumers, and we know for disabled people that they already face higher costs. And for thousands of unpaid carers, the only support they receive from the government is carers allowance, and in many cases that means they've been excluded from cost of living support. In addition to that, carers allowance is effectively means tested due to the earnings cap, meaning that carers can't seek work, as the Chief Secretary seems very keen for them to do. So will he commit to ensuring that we review the carers allowance situation, or if not, providing further support to carers to do such valuable work?
Well, she's right to say that even despite the energy price guarantee, this decisive intervention that's protected our constituents from £5,000 or £6,000 bills this year are higher still than they were last year. That's why we've made the £37 billion intervention, which for people on lower incomes amounts to £1,200 per year, and for people with disabilities, there's more money on top of that for the reason that she mentions. In terms of reviewing various components of disability and caring benefits, those of course will get reviewed in the normal way along with the other benefits, and my honourable friend, the Welfare Secretary, and my colleague, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will lay all of that out in the coming weeks.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I too am really concerned about the oversight of our pensions industry. So when was the last stress test to see whether these funds had sufficient liquidity to cope with market turbulence? And can the Minister, in simple terms, explain the regulation of pension funds right now? Because our country needs pension stability, not ongoing, homegrown financial crises.
Well, we've got excellent regulators overseeing our financial system and pensions in particular, whether that's the Bank of England, whether it's the Prudential Regulation Authority, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the pension regulator. They're all, of course, rightly independent, but I think all of us in government and indeed in Parliament can have every confidence that they are making sure our system is operating safely and securely.
Gavin Newlands.
Very much, Madam Deputy.